Welcome to the first official episode of What's Kraken, the show all about, well, what's going on with the Seattle Kraken. From just general news to eventually trades and games, this is where I'll talk about pretty much anything worth talking about around the Kraken, and probably even some things not necessarily worth talking about. Once things get a little bit more up and rolling with this team as we get into the summer and then certainly into their first season, this is a show that I plan on doing at least once a week and maybe more during that season. But until the summer and then probably in the off seasons, we'll go with probably more around once a month or once every other week depending on how much news comes out. Now that being said, we are starting to get to a point now with certain teams where it is realistic to start looking at who they might start protecting and who Seattle could potentially pick from that team in the upcoming expansion draft. But for now, let's go over what realistically little news we do have. By the way, if you do find yourself enjoying this video at any point and you like to do that kind of thing, then the subscribe button is down there. And I'm going to start off with one of the biggest pieces of news that we've had recently about the team, or at least sort of about the team anyway, which should give you some bearing of just how little news there has really been. And that is that a couple of weeks ago, the signage went up on Climate Pledge Arena and lit up for the first time in the Seattle skyline. Now again, I get, and we're not going to get too much into it, that Climate Pledge Arena isn't necessarily everybody's favorite name for an arena, but even if it isn't the most exciting name that an arena's ever had, once I saw the sign go up and saw some of the pictures of it lit up, I have to say that I think that it fits really well in the Seattle skyline and does look really nice with that bright green glow. I mean, there isn't really a whole lot more to say about it, but at least for me, the more bright green and blue in the Seattle skyline, the better, and I do think that it very much fits the city. Okay, yes, granted the name and color of the lights on top of the building isn't going to have any kind of impact on the team that eventually plays under them, but I figured this sign is only going to go up once, so it's maybe worth talking about when it does go up, especially considering there really isn't all that much else going on right now. But if you do want some more substantial things that could directly affect how this team plays on the ice, and even what players play for the team when they do eventually take the ice, well, then there are a couple of things that we can look at. And weirdly, the first of those things has to do with the one team that the Kraken won't be picking from, as the Vegas Golden Knights signed star defenseman Alex Pietrangelo. Coming into his 13th season in the NHL, Pietrangelo is coming off of one of, if not his best season in the league, where he established himself certainly as one of the better defensemen in the league. And especially considering he's a right-handed defenseman, which is a little bit more of a rare commodity at his level, it did make him one of the prime targets in free agency. So the Vegas Golden Knights getting him is certainly a sign that they are trying to win now. And as he joins a Golden Knights team that really didn't lose all that much, and on top of that, at the end of last season looked like they were one of, if not the best team in the West, even if they didn't go to the Stanley Cup this time, it certainly does make them a top contender to go to it this year. But even if at first glance, and rightly so, it is hard to get excited about the idea of one of Seattle's potential biggest rivals once they do enter the league getting better, well, there are also a couple of potential upsides to this. For one, the contract that Vegas signed Pietrangelo to has him at an $8.8 million cap hit for the next 7 seasons, which, if he's able to play at the All-Star and Norris finalist level that he did last year, it should be a very worthwhile contract for Vegas to have signed. But again, at the age of 31 and going into his 13th season, granted he is a defenseman, there's no guarantee how much longer he'll be able to stay in his prime. Plus, it does mean that Vegas is going to have some decisions to make as far as who else they can keep on the team in years to come. So again, this is very much a sign that Vegas is looking to try and win a cup in the next couple of years here, and potentially even mortgage their future 5 or 6 years out in order to do so. But more importantly for Kraken fans than what his signing in Vegas could mean for the potential of that team in the future, is what his signing could mean for the Kraken coming into the expansion draft. Now again, yes, Vegas is exempt from the expansion draft, so Seattle won't be picking a player from that team. But Vegas is still very much a part of the NHL for the next year, which means that they could still have gotten up to some shenanigans as far as maybe offering some trades to other teams for players that they might think they are going to lose to Seattle anyway. When it comes to people projecting how good they think Seattle could potentially be in its first season coming out of the expansion draft, Vegas and the idea of what they could do as far as side deals with teams considering they aren't going to be part of the expansion draft has always been one of the bigger wild cards. Because if they were able to pull off some of those trades with other teams to alleviate their stress over the expansion draft with Seattle, that just limits the number of things that Seattle could do to potentially take advantage of those situations like Vegas did when they came into the league. But now with the signing of Pietrangelo in Vegas and adding another $8.8 million onto the books, they are not only at but above the cap, which means they are still going to have to shed some weight coming into the season. Now there are rumors of them moving on from Pacioretty and maybe even Marc-Andre Fleury, so there still is a room for them to get at least a little bit under the cap. So if they aren't able to get more than just a couple of $1 million under the salary cap, which again, if they're trying to win now, they probably won't try that hard to, it should significantly limit their ability to perform some of those side deals that could in turn hamper what Seattle has options to leading into the expansion draft. Plus, with the cap likely staying flat for at least one more year, if not more, it should also limit their ability to just go crazy in free agency like they have over the first couple of years of their existence. So I guess the TLDR of all of this is that Vegas signing Pietrangelo makes them a better team, but also makes them less likely to mess with Seattle leading into the expansion draft. But that isn't the only news we got recently that could very much affect the expansion draft and what it looks like coming up in the summer of 2021. Now, we all know that last year the NHL didn't get to play a full season and eventually ended up missing out on roughly 15% of the regular season due to COVID. And even though they did originally aim at trying to make a full 82-game season happen for this one, that was realistically never going to happen. And now the latest proposal has them playing a 56-game season. Now, these two shortened regular seasons, last year and this year especially, could have a pretty significant impact on some of the rules around who's exposed for the expansion draft. Now, originally and still officially at this point, Seattle is going to have the exact same expansion rules that Vegas did. But with games missed in both of the last couple of seasons, it now seems pretty likely that the NHL is going to have to revisit a couple of those rules. Now, I already did do a video on the full rules of the expansion draft and what it all could mean for Seattle's potential future a little while ago, so if you are curious to know more about the expansion draft and all of the rules going into it, I will leave a link to that video down in the description below, and there might be a pop-up or something going on as well. But when it comes to now back-to-back shortened seasons, there is one rule in particular that could be looking at some pretty significant changes that could definitely mix things up in the long run for who teams are able to protect. And that's the rule that says that every team must expose at least one defenseman and two forwards who are under contract and have played either 40 games in the previous season or 70 games in the 2 seasons leading up to the expansion draft. Now, obviously, when the NHL came up with those rules of 40 games in 1 season or 70 in 2 seasons, they were expecting to play 2 seasons of 82 games. But since neither of the last 2 seasons leading into the draft will have met that 82 games, they could be looking to reduce both of those numbers. Now, first off, it does have to be said that there's no guarantee, especially considering how good Vegas was coming out of the gate, that the NHL will bother to change anything at all. But I would have to think that they probably will want to, considering they want Seattle to be at least competitive coming out of the gate, and Seattle did pay a whole heck of a lot of money in order to actually have a decent team. Or at least a chance to have a decent team anyway. So assuming they do decide to reduce those numbers, which makes sense that they would, there's any number of ways that they could decide on how much to reduce them by, but the one that makes the most sense is just by going by percentage of games missed. So as far as the first part of that with 40 games in the upcoming season, well, again, assuming that they have a 56-game season, that means that the season will be reduced to about 68% of what it was, which is decidedly not nice. So then to just directly convert it over, that would mean that that 40 games in the most recent season would get reduced down to 27 games. And then as we get to the 70 games over 2 years part of the rule, things get a little bit more complicated, especially considering not every team played the exact same number of games last year. But teams played on average roughly 70 games, so we'll just say that they all played that number. So over that 2-year stretch, teams will have played, assuming 56 games for this next season, 126 games of the 164 that they originally planned on, which comes out to roughly 77% of the games that this rule was written for. So again, if you were to just directly convert that over, that 70 games over 2 years would be reduced down to 54 games. Now again, I have to stress that nothing is guaranteed to change, and as this does seem like a pretty simple solution, since we know that nothing is particularly simple with the NHL when it comes to rule changing, well, it's hard to say that this is exactly what things will look like. But assuming that they do, and these are the reductions they make, it does mean that there will be a whole new headache for GMs to have to consider when it comes to making their plans for who they're going to protect. Especially for teams that might want to try and limit how much their players play so that they don't necessarily meet these requirements. So even though nothing's set in stone, it's just something to keep in mind, and especially as I do start getting into some videos about who teams might be protecting, it's another thing that we could be looking at as a potential change to really screwing up all of those projections. Either way though, it's fun to look at and definitely exciting to think about as we get closer and closer to the reality of the NHL in Seattle. Oh, and before I finish this up, I would be remiss to forget about the fact that Seattle was also recently named the best new brand of the year by the Sports Business Journal, which, considering there aren't all that many new brands every year, I guess isn't a huge accomplishment, but at the same time, it has to be said that Seattle did do a very good job with branding, and they have been a very popular brand, especially on Fanatics when it comes to purchases. So, it's well earned. Now there is actually one more big piece of Kraken related news that came out over the weekend while I was partway through editing this video, so I'm just slapping this onto the end. And that is that the NHL released a series of dates for major events that will happen over the course of this season, and then into the off-season, which does include when the expansion draft will happen. Now I say will happen with a bit of hesitation because, as we've seen, things can change pretty quickly in the current world, but at least for now, this is what they're aiming at. And as far as the Kraken are concerned, the big dates start on July 17th, when the 30 teams that they'll be picking from have to publish their protection lists. Then from the 18th to the 20th is the 2-day window in which the Kraken will get to talk to the UFAs that weren't on the protection list that they might want to select, leading up to the 20th, which is the day that they will finalize their picks and send them to the NHL to be announced on July 21st. And then, as if that 4-day period of time won't be enough of a whirlwind for the Seattle Kraken and especially their front office, just 2 days after that July 21st date when they will announce their picks in the expansion draft, they will have their first entry draft. So in the end, I do have to say that that's a 6-day period of time that I will not be terribly envious of the job that Ron Francis has. But it will be a very exciting week for Kraken fans. But that will finally bring us to the end of the first episode of What's Kraken. If you have made it to this point, as always, thank you very much for watching. If you did like this video, hit the thumbs up down below. If you really liked it, maybe even enjoyed it, the subscribe button is down there. Otherwise, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comment section below on anything about what you would like to see from this series, or just the Kraken in general. Otherwise, stay safe out there and be good to each other. Peace.